You boys be quiet down there!
Hi, and welcome back to PC-88 Paradise. Right now you're looking at the NEC PC-8801MC. Released in 1989, it was the final model of NEC's 8-bit computer lineup in Japan. And as I've shown in my previous videos, the interesting thing about this model is that you can attach a PC Engine or TurboGrafX CD drive and use it to run PC-88 CD-ROMs. As you can imagine, CD-ROM software for an 8-bit PC was kind of a strange novelty. It was introduced only late in the lifetime of this computer series, and owning this particular model was practically the only way you could run them. So only 2 games were ever released in the CD-ROM format. Today I'm going to look at one of them, Mirrors, released by Soft Studio Wing in 1990. Does the game make good use of the early CD-ROM technology? Let's find out. So this is probably going to be the shortest ever packaging segment on PC-88 Paradise. The game comes in a regular jewel case with very limited information on both the front and back. Suggested retail price of 9,800 yen for this? Really? That's almost $100. Anyway, inside we have the disc itself, and the manual is in black and white with only a bit of minimal information on the story, how to start the game, etc. To start, we need to simply boot the CD. In the system's BIOS menu, I'll turn the boot from CD option to on. Insert the disc and see what happens. We're taken to the Mirrors menu. Before we start the game, I'm going to select the third option here to create a user disk. Since this system doesn't have any place to write data other than floppy disks, this is the only means they could design for players to save their game. I'll follow the instructions on screen and format a user disk. This is all pretty standard up to this point. Next, let's go ahead and select the first option to start a new game. Immediately, the on-screen instructions ask me to insert 2 more blank floppy disks into the system. What for? Why does this game require 3 blank floppies? Well, it looks like we can't proceed any other way, so let me dig out 2 more floppies that I can format over. After a long process writing data to both disks, the instructions are telling me to take out a pen and write main disk on the disk in drive 1 and game disk on the disk in drive 2. No. You. Let's just press return to proceed. It tells me to reinsert the disks I just made. Well, I never took them out, so let's just press return. After watching the opening sequence and title screen, we're taken to this screen saying that the game is about to load data from the CD-ROM. Hit any key. Interesting that hit any key was considered a common enough phrase that they just wrote it in English. Let's do that, and the system begins again the long process of writing tons of data to the floppy disks. So I guess it's about time I come clean and explain exactly what the deal is with all of these floppies. This game uses the system's 2 floppy drives as a sort of cache for loading data from the CD-ROM. The main disk in drive 1 holds the main program for the game, which was just copied over in the earlier process. And the game disk in drive 2 holds whatever data the game needs for the current scene of the game. So at certain points, it stops to load another whole floppy disk's worth of data from the CD-ROM to drive 2. And then, while you play the game, data is loaded as needed from the floppy disks into the system's RAM. This, to me, is about the most crazy and awkward arrangement I can possibly imagine. Why do we need to have these 5¼ floppy disks involved in order to play a CD-ROM game? You're probably wondering the same thing as me. Why can't it just load data directly from the CD-ROM into the system's RAM? After all, the demo disc I also own for this system demonstrates that this system is perfectly capable of doing that. It can load data directly from the CD-ROM drive no differently from the way it does from floppies. So this game is using the floppy disks for one reason and one reason alone. Can you take a guess? It's so that the game's BGM can be played via Redbook audio from the CD drive. If you're familiar with old CD-ROM systems, then you know that the drive can't load data at the same time while it's playing Redbook audio. Couple that with the fact that this system has very little RAM, and that means that without using floppy disks as a buffer, this particular game would need to be constantly stopping the music in order to seek and load new graphics and sound effects from the CD. So instead, the job of passing data directly to RAM is handled by the floppy drives, while the CD drive is free to play Redbook audio. I know that seems like a lot of trouble just so that the game can have Redbook audio for the BGM, but you have to understand that in 1990, full quality CD audio was one of the biggest selling points of CD-ROM based systems. I was there. I remember how awesome it was when I first heard CD audio in TurboGrafX CD and Sega CD games. So anyway, I guess we're just going to have to deal with this. Every time this screen comes up, it takes about 1 minute and 20 seconds to load a full scene's worth of data to drive B. This is even longer than Neo Geo CD load times. At first I thought this was going to make the game almost unplayable, but it actually only needs to be done every 10 to 15 minutes or so I actually found it surprisingly tolerable. Then again, not everyone enjoys the sound of 5-inch floppy drives reading and writing as much as I do. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by old computer hardware. Isn't it weird though to think that this setup is kind of skipping past an entire major format of external computer storage? Copying data directly from a CD to 5-inch floppies just feels like a weird combination. I know that CDs and 5-inch floppies coexisted throughout most of the 80s, but CD-ROMs just feel like a much more advanced storage format. In the early 90s, CD-ROMs were new and awesome, 5-inch floppies were old and obsolete. So I think I've complained about the technical aspects enough for now. Maybe it's about time I talked about the game. As you've probably figured out by now, Mirrors is a graphic adventure game that uses a combination of real photos and drawings in order to tell its story. The graphics are presented in tinted monochrome, probably both in order to allow for a greater level of detail on the PC-88's hardware and also to give the game a mysterious atmosphere. Save for a few incidental yells and screams, the dialogue is presented in text only. Mirrors is the story of David Matthews. No, not that David Matthews. This David Matthews is also the lead singer in a band. Fictional British indies band Eleno Vision is just about to break into the mainstream with their upcoming European tour. However, David is haunted by constant nightmares where he is running for his life and occasionally killing people. After his first nightmare at the beginning of the game, David wakes up to learn that his band's manager has died under mysterious circumstances. She is replaced by a young woman named Sushana Lin. Sushana soon becomes romantically involved with David, as he begins to confide in her about his strange nightmares. Near the beginning, whenever this game feels like it has suddenly jumped the shark, that's usually because David has fallen asleep at some point unknown to the player, and we are suddenly in the middle of one of David's nightmares. Usually after he wakes up, someone related to the band or the tour seems to have died. I figured the twist was going to be that David was sleepwalking and unknowingly committing murder. But no, the game has something far more weird in store for us. It is probably worth mentioning that the fictional band Eleno Vision is almost certainly modeled after real-life English electronic band Depeche Mode. The names of the band members are all similar, and the detectives in the game Vince and Clark are probably a reference to Depeche Mode founding member Vince Clark. There are plenty of Japanese graphic adventure games from this time where you move between different areas via the menus, maybe even picking up items and using them at other locations. But Mirrors is the other type of graphic adventure game, one that is almost completely linear and is advanced forward simply by reading the dialogue. Most of the time all you do is choose who speaks next. You just need to make sure you select someone other than the person who just spoke the previous line of dialogue and you'll move forward. I would say the game is more akin to reading a graphic novel rather than navigating through a game. One memorable scene in the game is the band's first live performance. A strobing rainbow of colors is accompanied by a beautiful mess of English grammar and spelling. Since this game uses Redbook CD audio, how cool would it have been to get a real band with a real singer for the audio rather than lyrics written on the screen? I get it, obviously they didn't have the budget for that, but that would have been such a great chance to show off the capabilities of this new CD-ROM technology. The BGM in Mirrors is all CD audio, but like many low-budget CD-ROM games from this time, it's fairly cheap-sounding early 90s Japanese elevator music. Most is original, but there's also a rendition of this classic French piano piece that I can't pronounce, for those quiet moments in the story. There's also a fair amount of PCM sound effects to go along with the story, but man, the sound of David panting during his nightmares is annoying. Some sound better though. How about this creepy voice calling out David's name? We always get dragged back to reality though by the horrifying sound of David's yell. So let me explain what's really going on in the story. If you can read Japanese and are planning on actually playing this game, then consider this your spoiler warning. It turns out that unbeknownst to David, he is the reincarnation of a demon king who lived hundreds of years earlier, and his manager Sushana is also the reincarnation of one of his servants. She is part of a cult that is dedicated to resurrecting the demon king in David's body, in order to use his powers to fight against their sworn enemy, the King of the North.
Of course, why didn't I think of that?
So Sushana has known the truth about David all along, and became his manager in order to get close to him. I guess that's why she didn't find it weird at all when David began telling her about his dreams of demon kings and disciples. The story does an amazingly good job of gradually transitioning between one where weird things only happen in David's dreams, to one where dreams are intertwined with reality. Hey, who's this guy? As I mentioned earlier, most of this game is linear. The only times when the decisions you make actually have any effect on the outcome of the story are a few points near the very end, which result in 7 very different endings, only one of which isn't extremely dark and could maybe be considered a happy one. It's interesting that through most of the game, Sushana is actively deceiving and even manipulating David. And yet, depending on which ending you get, Sushana can seem either completely evil or a tragic victim of circumstances. In this ending, for instance, Sushana is shown to have been completely deceived and manipulated into doing what she did by the spirit of the Demon King. It leads to a Romeo and Juliet sort of ending, with David and Sushana clutching each other's hands as they die. I saved my game using the user disc before each major decision and managed to see all 7 endings. By the way, if I can be allowed to rant a little more, why does this game even need a separate user disc? You can only hold one game save on the user disc, and it takes less than a second to save after you've swapped the main disc with the user disc. I find it hard to believe that they couldn't have reserved a little extra space on one of these 2 discs in order to hold the save data. Then you wouldn't have to swap discs at all when you save. Seriously, did they even bother thinking this through at all? So, did Mirrors do a good job of demonstrating the potential of the CD-ROM technology? Well, I would say no. The sad thing to me is that this game could have been pulled off so much better without the weird floppy disk caching system. What they should have done instead is just load everything directly from the CD and use FM synth for the music. I can actually imagine this soundtrack sounding really good on the PC-88's soundboard too, if the arrangement was in capable hands. Then if they really wanted to, they could maybe use the CD's Redbook audio for some of the incidental sound effects rather than relying on the grainy sounding PCM. Though the CD-ROM format didn't take off on the PC-88, I can imagine that if it had, its best application would have been more akin to releasing floppy disk games on CD. In fact, this is exactly what happened in later years on systems like the PC-88. For instance, the Legend of Heroes 3 Renewal could be purchased on either 11 floppy disks or a single CD-ROM. Mirrors was ported to only one other platform, Fujitsu's FM Towns in 1992. This is obviously the far superior version of the game. The graphics are higher res, though they are still in monochrome. The concert scene in this version has been improved a little with the inclusion of some rudimentary full-motion video. Most importantly though, this version does away with the ridiculous floppy drive caching system of the PC-88 version. The FM Towns has enough RAM that it can load up all the necessary data at once, then play the exact same CD audio as the PC-88 version. The only disadvantage to this version is that one of the endings from the PC-88 version is missing. Mirrors definitely has its fans, as well as its critics. My opinion lies somewhere in between. The European concert tour that serves as the backdrop for most of the game feels like mostly an excuse to show pictures of famous sights from cities like Paris and Rome. and much of the story and characters I found rather average and forgettable, but definitely not all of it. If nothing else, Mirrors does a great job of establishing a weird and creepy atmosphere. It feels rather unique and memorable once you've spent some time playing the game and gotten accustomed to it. Just hearing that cheaply arranged CD music again while editing this video is enough to bring me back to the weird world of Mirrors. And you know what? I think I kinda like it. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleno Vision, performing their hit single, Get, Get, Get.
I think so, but Lord forget, I'm a puppet of society, just only dancing today. I won't do something day by day.
Thanks for watching this episode of PC-88 Paradise. If you liked this video, please check out all our others. We have plenty of content related to interesting games of the 80s and 90s, and make sure to subscribe to Basement Brothers if you haven't already. See you again next time.